Welcome to Parallel Leaders. Every week, we come alongside you and focus on 8 growth points to address the obstacles holding you back. Not only do you need to grow as a leader, but your team, your systems, your numbers, your finances, the expectations, the facilities, and your culture must grow. If you target and evaluate your organization, leadership, or department under the microscope of these 8 growth points, you will optimize your effectiveness as a leader. And today's podcast is all about equipping you with the tools and conversations you need to move forward. So let's go.
So change is hard as a leader. I don't know if you know this. It is hard to lead change, but change is hard. And, leading change is hard. It's hard to move people to a more desirable future. You would think, that's what leadership is, moving people to a more desirable future. And, you'd think everyone wants to do that, but that's not true. People are stuck. People are, that's why we need leaders. That's why we need people like you, because we have this propensity as humans to stay in the same thing, to not want to take new steps. And so it's just difficult, but then it's even more difficult in a culture that keeps changing. I don't know if you've noticed this, but the culture we serve in keeps changing. And so the dynamics that we lead in are different today than they were 5 years ago, than where they were 10 years ago. And, I even remember 5 years ago, we would talk about this, and I would have to belabor this point with people and be like, that the culture is shifting around you. And people would look at you and they're like, yeah, and they'd try to give some examples. But now it's you just see the world pre-COVID and post-COVID. Doesn't it feel different? Stuff has changed. This is different. Things have shifted in our culture. Politically, things have got really divisive. Even the fact that I just said politically, some of you in the room are like, oh my goodness, it's a fact. Where I used to be able to say that 5 years ago, and it would be like, what are you talking about? I guess they're kind of divided. But now it's really divided. You do not want to talk about things because it could blow up in your face. So change is hard, but it's even more hard in kind of a changing culture, how the world, the context we change in. Years ago, I sat down with a friend at one of those fancy restaurants, and we were talking about this. And when someone says something to you and it sticks in your brain, you cannot get it out, stuck in your brain. That's what this person did. We were talking about this, and he said, yeah, this is the way I think about leadership. And we were in one of those fancy restaurants with the craft paper and the crayons. That's highbrow restaurant. And so he's on the table in front of me. He draws out this right here. Now it obviously didn't look that nice because it was in crayons, and it was a line like that, and arrows on both ends, and then a little hash mark in the middle. And this friend of mine, dear friend, who's led a whole bunch of different stuff, said, the way I think about it is this. So this line represents everything that your church does. This represents everything that Parallel Church does. And that little hash mark in the middle, everything on this side of the line is pushing the mission forward. It's making us more like the church that God's called us to be. Now, everything on that side of the line is slowing us down. It is making us not be as effective. Now, just even that alone is a lot to admit to you as a leader, that there are things here at Parallel today that we are doing that are pushing us forward, and there are some things that are slowing us down. That may be a novel idea for you, but it is true. There are things that we do, even related to our whole conversation from this morning when we started. There are things that we just do that we keep doing because they're museum-y, and eventually they'll end up in the mausoleum phase, and we've got to figure out what those things are, but they're here. They are in our midst. Now, the difficulty is, over time, what takes place is, next slide, and he draws another line out, and he says, the culture changes, the culture shifts. And then draws out this other line, and then goes to the next slide. There's this weird zone that's represented by that blue box, which is things that we used to do as an organization that before the culture shifted, they were effective. They actually did help push the mission forward. But because the context, that other line, changed, because the world that we're in changed, now, if we just keep doing those things in the same way, our ministry will be less effective. They'll slow us down. And so examples from that in my ministry career. So this is going to give you a little bit of light of how long I've been in ministry. This stuff was not actually happening when I first started, but I remember early on in ministry, people talking about bus ministry. Now, have you guys ever done bus ministry? You probably did at some point. So bus ministry, there were churches, including this church, that used to have buses that would drive around the neighborhood and pick up kids and say, hey kids, why don't you come to church on Sunday morning? Hey little kiddies, get on our bus and come to church. Just saying it sounds creepy. You're like, that is just wrong. Like, if we tried that today, hopefully we don't do bus ministry anymore. I'd be stepping on all kinds of problems. I'm leaving, it's fine. If you kept doing that today, like, obviously, that's like an obvious example. People would look at parallel church and they would say, what exactly does parallel mean? Like, what? That's very odd. They pick up children. But it was legit ministry. Like, that was like it was a well-worn way to reach communities, and comes from a great spot, and actually, like, it tapped into something that we know, which is if you can reach people's kids, that their parents do tend to follow, like, that's all true. But why does that not work anymore? Well, it's because the line has shifted. The culture has shifted around us. Now, that's like an extreme example, but the problem is it's very difficult to see what's in that blue zone. It's very difficult to see what that. And so what we're going to talk about, next slide, is 3 things that I think are 3 ways that the culture has shifted, these are early kind of ideas that are kind of, that I think are, they're and when you talk about culture, it's like very hard to kind of nail down. They're things that I think have shifted that are impacting how we should serve. And so what we're going to do is we're going to talk about these things, like I said, throw it to you, and you're going to talk about it at your group. How do you see those things impacting your ministry? And then, the ultimate question is, are there things we should change because of that, if that makes sense? So 3 things that are 3 cultural shifts that are impacting our church. Let's look at the next slide. So the first one is this: trust in church leaders declined during the pandemic, and it wasn't in a great place to start. So I don't know if you have seen the statistics on this, but there was, so church leaders, which I'd put us all in, whether you're on staff or not, during the pandemic, are the overall, Gallup does and again, these American statistics, don't shoot me. Gallup looks at a whole bunch of different careers and says who has the trusted, who's the most trusted and who's the least trusted of industries. And there were a number that made big shifts during the pandemic. Can anyone think of one that went up really, really well? That do you just even think in the last couple of years? What's a role that everybody's like, man, we trust them more now? Can you think of what that might be? Medical, so nurses particularly. Nurses went way up on the list during the pandemic. People were like, wow, those people are amazing. There was one other that went up, took a big jump up during the pandemic. Anyone just guess. It's just interesting. Kind of. What's that? Teachers. Ding, 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 ding. That's the other one. People looked at teachers and were like, man, teachers, they are amazing. The fact they put up with our kids, and then we might have given them a disease, like that's pretty incredible. But the 2 that took the biggest drop, one was pastors, religious leaders. Was not the largest drop during the pandemic. What do you think the largest drop was? Politicians, exactly, fell to the very bottom of the list. Actually, at the very bottom of the list is federal, so senators in the states, is the least trusted people, which is just like a non-political statement. Isn't that fascinating? But we took a dramatic fall. There used to be a time, believe it or not, and this is probably none of our lifetimes, but there used to be a time. Does anyone remember the show Little House on the Prairie? Like, that actually was kind of true. Like, the minister was actually looked at as like they're like a really trusted person. Like, they were really liked. Like, people actually liked pastors. Now it's like, those people are kind of weird. Like, so it has taken a huge drop. So what does this mean? So this is definitely a dynamic. People look at you and me as leaders in a church, and there is less trust there today than there was 4 years ago. People look at us with more suspicion. They look at what we do as leaders particularly, and are like, I don't know about those people. So let's go to the next slide. So this is some of the implications of that. We have to stop assuming people care, meaning that they care about us, that they think that we're a big deal at all. That they look at us and think like we have something to offer. Again, getting back to the Little House on the Prairie kind of silly example, there was a time where pastors, religious leaders, Sunday school teachers were like the most educated people in town, and were the people that people look to solve problems. Now, they don't do that. So a couple kind of implications of that. There's this one guy who totally respect on this conversation. He tells the story like this. He says, there used to be a time where in Canada, in the States, this, Canadians know this more intuitively than Americans. So if I say this in the States, they're like, whoa, that's a really dynamic idea, but you'll get this really quickly because you're smart Canadians. There used to be a time where if you thought about the religious makeup, the kind of religious leadership makeup, it was a rectangle table. On one end of the table were Christians. On the other end of the table were maybe Jewish folks, or maybe it was like Protestants and Catholics were on either end of the table, but like our type of church was on one end of the table, meaning we had like a lot of say, and then there was someone else, maybe Jews, maybe some other group on the other end, and then everybody else was kind of down the side of the table. It was a rectangle table, but there were a couple groups that were super dominant. That's just not true anymore. We live in a round table world where we are seen as we have lost, as the kind of Christian group in town, we have lost the ability to speak with any kind of authority, and have to interact with other religious groups. Even we were talking about this, having other folks that serve in our areas. That's like very typical of, and a good thing. We have to figure out how to do that, because that's the culture that we're in. We no longer sit in a culture where we are seen as like, hey, those are the people we should respect. So I think that's a real dynamic. So during the pandemic, QAnon, if you don't know what that is, praise Jesus. You don't know about it, that's great. Conspiracy peddlers are a problem for all of us, regardless of what you think. So the church has been backed into a corner and been labeled as being peddlers of conspiracy theories. We're seen as a place where, like, we generate that stuff. People assume that, that is where those things come from. So I think that leads us that we need to think more like missionaries. The other interesting piece of this puzzle is I think many of us have a framework in our mind that we think of our culture as post-Christian. Like we think, this place used to be Christian. And a part of the reason why that is because you drive around Lethbridge and there's like churches here. You drive around and there's like old churches in town and stuff. So you think post-Christian. But it could actually be that we're more pre-Christian, that actually most of the people we're reaching, they don't have any context of who we are. There's so much of what happens here. Like if you were to pull up 15 people we were to walk down Lethbridge tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. or 11:30, whatever time your service is, and pull 10 people who weren't in a church anywhere and said, what happens in churches today? They would be like, I really have no idea. I have no context to what is happening there. Maybe they sing, they don't have any, it would be similar to you, like you're in a if you've never been to any other religious ceremony, like have you been to a synagogue? Like it would be very hard for you to speak with clarity around what actually happens at a synagogue, or like if you haven't been to a mosque, you'd be like, what happens at a mosque? And you'd be like, I really have no idea. That's most of the people in our culture, where I think a lot of us are holding on with this idea that we're post-Christian, that there's like people that we just have to kind of get over some hurdles in their brains and they'll follow Jesus. Well, actually, it's more profound than that. They're suspicious of us, and they're pre-Christian. So that's one of the dynamics, that there's a growing decline in trust of leaders, particularly church leaders. All right, let's go to the next slide here. All right, Gen Z, our friends Gen Z and then Gen Alpha, which is the group that comes after that, say they feel less connected to their church during and post COVID-19. 43%. That is a staggering statistic. So this is, next slide. As Gen Z goes, there goes your church and mine. So our ability to transmit, this, but just let this sink in. Our ability to transmit the message of Jesus to the next generation means we're one generation away from the gospel being extinct in our culture. And that's always been true. We always have to be thinking about the next generation. Every generation has to turn around and think about, what are we doing to pass this thing on? Now, the difficulty has been there's been a number of pressures on Gen Z and Gen Z, and Gen Alpha over these last few years that have made this group less connected. And I would argue that this group was the most profoundly impacted. I know everyone was profoundly impacted by COVID, but I would say this group was the most profoundly impacted. If you look at the even just the numbers here, if you say 19% of 15-year-olds, these are American statistics, so you probably have to cut them in half. If you look at, in Canadian statistics, 19% of 15-year-olds attend church, while only 9% of 19-year-olds. There's something that happened there's like a 5 or 6 year window, and I'd be intrigued and when I've talked with churches in details about this, we're all finding this similar window. There's like a profound window of kids in high school and just post-high school where they have struggled to keep those people. Now, maybe that's not the case here at Parallel, but there's a significant issue there. Ambivalent screenagers, I love that name. This idea of people who are that's a funny way to say it, but we're that generation. We've given them devices and just said, "Great, this will raise you," and that's not a guilt statement, but that is what's happened culturally. We've said this thing will help you, and the difficulty is, I do think we're all going to look. We look at the ads back in the 50s for smoking that said 8 out of 9. Doctors recommend Marlboro cigarettes, and we look at that and are like, that's crazy. Like, those people are nuts. Our kids and our grandkids are going to look at the way we handle social media and screens with our kids in the same way. Like, just get used to that. That's going to happen. Eventually, people are going to look at you and say, you're crazy. I can't believe you did that. You were alive when you used to just give people devices? That's unbelievable. And, that has all kinds there's tons on this. There are all kinds of, negative stuff there. So there's a number of critical developmental pieces that really did bore the brunt of the pandemic. So they're, in that, say, if you went into the pandemic, say 12 to 16, 17 years of age, that group in particular, there are a number of social milestones that group missed that are having a profound impact and could have a profound impact on us long term. So. And then, like our friends at Apple Computer, did you see this thing they released this week? This, the goggles thing, the vision thing, I'm sounding more negative than I normally sound. I realize I sound like I'm like an old man, a crotchety old, get off my lawn. But, that thing just seems weird to me. I'm like, the saddest part of that was, there's a guy, cooking at his house, and there's a kid. Did you see this video? This is Apple actually put this out. It's a thing, a headset thing that's augmented reality. And there's instead of engaging with his kid who happens to be there, he's cooking while he has this thing on his head, and then he hands his son his dinner. And I was like, wow, if that's the future we're headed for, that seems really fairly dystopian. That would be concerning to me. So there's an issue you're going to have to deal with in your church. I don't know what the answer is. You're going to talk about it in your group in a minute. All right, last one. Let's take a look at this. So our commitment model has changed probably forever. So when I started in ministry, which again, I'm sounding like an old man, the first church I worked for, which is not that long ago, that's, 30 years ago, 90s, that was 30 years ago, 25 years ago. We had Sunday morning service. This is what we'd say to people. This is what we meant by commitment model. We'd say, come to church on Sunday morning. Then we're going to have a great Sunday morning service. We also had Sunday morning adult Bible schools, so you do that too. And then you come back on Sunday night, and you'd come for a different service. You did not have to wear a tie to that service. You could come without a tie at that service. And then you would do a small group, because we were just starting small groups, so you'd also have a small group. And then Wednesday night, you'd come back and you would do Bible study, or you'd do prayer meeting on Wednesday night. So we did, and that was just considered normal. That commitment model was not for leaders of the church. That was just that's what everybody did. You should do all those things. If you're a part of our church, you do that. 5 or 6 different things. And we've all seen this, right? What has happened over time? We have cut a bunch of those things, which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing. We've cut a bunch of that stuff. And now our commitment model is, could you please show up once a month would be amazing. If you came here 1.3 times a month, you would be incredible. So that we would love it if you could do that. And we've seen that continue, to slide over the time. And particularly in the last few years, we have seen that commitment model just continue to be, eroded. People, what it means to be a member of a church, member of Parallel, an active, engaged part of this community just keeps getting smaller and smaller. I don't know what to do with that, but you're going to talk about it in your group, and you'll figure it out. So the next slide here. So getting people to plugged in does have some interesting, profound impacts. So engaged people invite people who actually love your church, come more than 1.6 times a month or 1.35 times a month. They actually are most likely to tell their friends about church. And so what does it mean that our commitment model is eroding? It means that people are going to be less likely to invite their friends, which means we will reach less people. So there is negative downstream consequence of people having less commitment to, what we do. WIFM, does anyone know what WIFM stands for? Has anyone heard that? It's like an acronym. Yes. What is in it for me? WIFM. So this is one of those areas where you can debate me and talk about it in your group in a minute. But people's orientation to the world has always been they are selfish. They are what is in it for me? But the culture has turned up the volume on this. One of the things that social media has done in particularly is we are used to our experiences being fine-tuned and tailored to me. Do you know how radical of that idea is? That you can open up your phone, flip through Instagram, and 0 people in the world will see the same thing. That algorithm is learning you. It's trying to say, I want to find the exact right thing for you. And you've had this happen, right? The one I had recently was I was talking with a friend who lives in Paris about the Paris Olympics. I didn't even know the Paris Olympics are going to be in Paris. And I was talking about the Paris Olympics, and he was telling me some cool stuff about the Paris Olympics. And all of a sudden, magically, what happens on my phone? Stuff for the Paris Olympics starts showing up. Now, I don't know what is happening there. This is very strange to me that that's happening. But if you can get beyond they're listening to us thing, and think about the fact that somewhere people are making a decision to try to customize this thing directly to me. Now, the problem with that is people's ongoing expectation of how the world should function, that everything should be completely customized to them and to their specific needs. So what does that mean for us as a church? I think we have to articulate what we do. The language we have to articulate to them is how being a part of whatever it is we're talking about as a church, how that is actually beneficial for them. You can no longer say, you should be in a small group. You need to start with questions. Are you looking to connect with people? Do you want to grow in your relationship, with your relationship with Jesus? Do you have questions you're not sure what to do with? We've got this thing here at the church called small groups you should join. We have to position stuff from their point of view, from where they're coming from, not from what we need. It used to be the church is open, you should show up. That's literally the commitment model when I started. It was like, we're running something, you better come here. And we did. That was amazing. People, I know you find that hard to believe, but that actually used to work. We're going to open something, people would show up. Now it's like, people don't care. They want to know what's in it for me. The third part of this is, we need more metrics. And this is for people who particularly are in leadery type positions. But we need more metrics than just noses and nickels. So how many people are actually attending stuff and how much money are we generating? Those are not good, well, they're fine. You should track those things. But they're incomplete statistics. We have to track more than that. We have to figure out how we track are people actually engaged. One of those examples would be, and I don't know what your practice is here, so I apologize for that. It used to be we'd have people sign up for, this is true, we would have people sign up for small groups, and then they would show up for small groups. Remember that? People would or you would say, I'm going to volunteer. I will get on a schedule to volunteer. You'd have Volunteer Sunday, and people would sign up for volunteering. And then you know what they would do? Is they would actually show up and volunteer. Those two things were connected. But those two things are not necessarily connected anymore. People's intention and their actual action are two different things. And that's why we use stuff like Planning Center to try to track all that. What is the gap between people signing up and showing up? That's an interesting engagement number. That's something we should know about. Another interesting engagement number is how many first-time guests do we have every Sunday? we used to just we didn't have to think a lot about that. Guests would show up, we'd be nice to them. Now it's like, and I see it, you guys do it here. You're like handing out gifts and like doing the jig to try to, get contact information from those people. That's an important number because it gives us an insight into engagement. So these are the 3 issues. The first one is this distrust of the church and church leaders. The second is this whole Gen Z, Gen Alpha issue that kids, that particular generation is, that we're seeing a departure that has been accelerated because of COVID and all this stuff in the last few years. And then third is this commitment model. We see an erosion. People are less committed than they were. That's showing up in less participation.
Thank you for listening to the Parallel Leaders podcast. If you're looking for additional resources, tools, and conversations to move your organization forward and capture the hearts of your community, check out parallelleaders.com and make sure to subscribe to receive each new episode as it's released. And don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Parallel Leaders. We'll see you next time.